warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The topic of our talk today is game theory and its application. Just a reminder, this is part of our bi-weekly mind presentation series. So let's get started. What is game theory? Game theory is a way to understand how rational beings interact to maximize their gains and minimize their losses. The key thing to understand here is the entities involved are rational beings. They make good judgments, they do not have egos, they don't take revenges. That's the key assumption of game theory. And this is an oversimplification, but to start a model, you always have simple things, and then you add different variables. So game theory is not related to any improving any game strategies and stuff like that, at least in this context. What we are talking about is how real world entities interact with each other to maximize their gains and maximize their profits and avoid losses. Game theory was developed as a part of mathematical problems and was then extended to practical problems of the world. And this is very typical of what we see in the Western world. A field that was developed in a separate silo gets applied to a completely different problem, especially for economics and policy making. The early works on game theory was developed by John Van Neumann in his work on theory of games of strategy. And in next 16 years, he worked on applying that game theory that he was working on to economic behaviors. And then as the arms race heated with USSR nuclear test in 1956, and US already had a atomic bomb prior to 1945, there were several institutes that were established to carry out calculations on how United States should behave in the situation where USSR is also developing nuclear weapons. And one such institute was RAND Corporation, which carried out this work by hiring mathematicians like Flood and Drescher. Another researcher is John Nash. And if you can remember the movie Beautiful Mind, it was based on his in his life, and he carried on the game theory work to a new level. The importance of work can be understood when we look at the recipients of 1994 Nobel Prize winners in economics. All three of them were from the fields of game theory. One was John Nash, another one was John Harsanyi, and the third one was Reinhard Selten. So game theory has a lot of importance in solving real life issues, real life policy making problems, which involves competition and cooperation. Some of the real areas where game theory is applied include economics and business, political sciences and international relations. Then in sciences, it's applied to biology and ecology. And in policy making, again, healthcare and medicine, energy and environment, and then military and defense. So let's look at some of the key concepts in game theory. The most fundamental concept of game theory, as you can obviously guess, is game. Now, what are the characteristics of the game? The characteristics of game are like it involves two or more players. They have to interact to win the game. The second thing is the moves cannot be robotic. They have to be dependent on other players' move. The third is games can involve cooperation, but definitely involves competition when it comes to the last player at least. And then there are the two models in games, which is like cooperation and non-cooperation. Cooperative games, as in like the game of Monopoly, and there are non-cooperative games from the get-go, like chess. Lastly, players have to take actions with projected outcomes. Another key concept in game theory is the concept of equilibrium. What is equilibrium? Equilibrium is a state which is achieved when players take the best decision given decisions of other players. And then there is the concept of optimal strategy. This is the highest payoff, most beneficial response given other players' chosen move. Then you have the concept of dominant strategy, which is the best course of action regardless of other players' move. We have to remember that not all situations have a dominant strategy, and there is a concept of Nash equilibrium, which we will discuss shortly. Then we have the concept of zero-sum game, where one person's gain is other person's loss. Okay. Now let's dwell into some of the scenarios of game theory. They are very popular scenarios, and it's important to understand them because they're frequently used in describing the scenarios, and we don't want to describe the whole scenario when we discuss the problem. So the first scenario is called prisoner's dilemma. In prisoner's dilemma, imagine you have two friends who committed a robbery and were caught by the police. Let's call them prisoners A and prisoner B. Now they are being interrogated in separate rooms and have two choices. The first choice is to confess. The second is to remain silent. The payoff for the choices are as follows. If both confess, which we are marking it as C, they get a sentence of 7 years in prison. If one confesses and the other remains silent, which we're marking as C, S or S, C, the confessor gets a sentence of 2 years, while the silent one gets 12 years because of their stubbornness. If both of them remain silent and stubborn, they each get a sentence of 3 years. So what should A and B do? There is a level of strategic thinking involved here, and there's a lot of dilemma. And this also, we are showing here the payoff matrix, which is a mathematical concept, and we'll not dwell into it in this presentation. The next scenario is a tragedy of commons. This scenario depicts the problem of overexploitation of shared resources by self-interested individuals. Overexploitation leads to depletion of resources and harms the collective good of the community. We can see these examples in rural areas, for example, overgrazing of pastures by selfish farmers or overfishing by selfish fishermen. And in more global context, you can see in the climate change problem, where none of the countries want to cut down their pollution levels and sacrifice economic growth to save the environment. So none of them want to make sacrifices for the collective good. So how is tragedy of commons handled? The tragedy of commons is handled only by creating regulations and penalizing the offenders. Of course, you can use motivation, but usually it doesn't work. It usually comes down to having regulations and forming norms. The next scenario is the ultimatum game. In the ultimatum game, there are two players. One player is the proposer and the other is the responder. The proposer is given a fixed amount of money, say $10, which they have to share it with the responder. For example, they can give $2 to the responder and keep $8, or they can give them $5 and keep $5 for themselves. So you get the idea here. So what does the responder have to do? The responders can either accept or reject the offer. If the responder accepts the offer, both players receive the proposed split. And if they reject, neither player receives anything. So the proposer has to be very careful in what they are offering it to the responder. If they offer too low, sometimes they get offended and they might reject the deal and both of them lose. And if they offer responder too much, and then the proposer will get a lesser amount of money. And now let's discuss a few terms related to strategies. The dominant strategy and optimum strategy. The dominant strategy is the best response from a player, regardless of what other person does. An optimal strategy is the best response from a player given a specific response from the opponent. For example, in Prisoner's Dilemma, the dominant strategy is to confess and save yourself because you don't know what your partner will do. And the best way is to protect yourself and confess and try to get a lesser term of prison. Example of optimal strategy is to, for example, in the game rock paper scissors, you basically be unpredictable and choose rock paper scissors randomly with equal probability. So looking at real life scenarios, in arms race, the dominant strategy is to keep making arms because you don't know what your opponent is doing. And this is exactly what USA and USSR did during the Cold War. And okay, so now let's look at the Nash equilibrium. So when every player is playing their optimal strategy, we reach what is called as Nash equilibrium. To illustrate Nash equilibrium, imagine two siblings who have to share a pizza. One sibling will cut the pizza. We will call him or her cutter, and the other will choose the piece first, and we will call them chooser. So the Nash equilibrium for this scenario is that the cutter will cut the pizza into exactly two slices. Because if they make one slice bigger, the other sibling, who's the chooser, will pick up that slice. So the optimal strategy is to cut the pizza into exactly two parts so that the cutter will receive their fair share, and the chooser will have no edge in getting a bigger slice. The practical example will be the nuclear weapons arms race. If one side disarmed and the other remains armed, disarmed side will be at disadvantage. Also, if both sides disarm, it reduces mutual threat. But trust issues remains. So arming remains the optimal strategy because trust in the international arena, especially when the two countries have very different views, remains an issue. So the Nash equilibrium for this scenario would be that both the countries will develop weapons. A Nash equilibrium provides us a tool for understanding the strategic interaction between groups. Games can also be classified according to whether they are being played simultaneously or one after the other. Some games involve making decisions simultaneously, whereas there are some other games in which decision has to be made after the first player has made their move completely. So, example, tennis. And tennis is a simultaneous game, near simultaneous game, because you have to react very quickly on a person's move. Whereas high jump, game like high jump, where the first player goes and jump and sets a value, and the other party then comes in and has a target to achieve. So that's there's a simultaneous versus sequential game. So example of strategies in serialized game, which I will not be dwelling in this, include the backward induction, credible threats and promises, because you make promises and threats when your time comes for the other person. So this is kind of a little bit of complicated things which you can read on your own. The example of serialized game is often found in politics, in, say, a divided parliament where the ruling party proposes a bill, the opposition initially opposes the bill and proposes some modification to include their agenda. So it goes through multiple revisions, and each party kind of plays a game by proposing what their needs are, what their priorities are, and in the end, usually, after a slow policy making scenario, divided houses are always a slow policy making scene, and they come up with multiple revisions and a final bill. Strategies in simultaneous games. You have to basically, for example, again in arms race, you cannot wait. You have to develop your nuclear arsenals as your opponent is filling their arsenal, and you also apply it in, say, consumer market when two companies do not know about each other's plan. Common example is like the carriers in United States, say Verizon and AT&T, and in India, let's say Airtel and Reliance. So they don't know what the other person is offering till the time they offer. Let's say on Thanksgiving Day, what are their deals? So you have to basically prepare for simultaneous actions, and also probably have to change your course as you see the other party's offers. Then games can also be classified according to being repeated in nature or one-off. The repeated games are those games which are played many number of times in succession. So it is more complex than a one-off game because of the history that you store about what happened in the previous round. Imagine a prisoner's dilemma being played repeatedly. In one-off game, like we discussed, dominant strategy is to defect, as in like confess and get a shorter prison. That's the dominant as well as the optimal strategy. But dominant strategy, actually, not optimal strategy. But in repeated prisoner's dilemma, the optimal strategy can be cooperation based on how your opponent is behaving. You can actually stay silent, and the players can actually stay silent given the trust they developed by playing the game repeatedly. Then you have the another game, tit for tat strategy. It's actually strategy, not a game. That is to punish the opponent for defection and reward for cooperation. So in game, like, people have memories, so they can use prior decisions of your opponent to either cooperate or punish them. And then forgiveness if the consequence that you suffered in the previous round is not that big. So it can easily be interpolated to let's say international arena, United Nations, or trade relations. So you can use these scenarios. You can always think about these scenarios being used in these contexts. For example, if in a UN resolution, if you cooperate in bringing up a UN resolution, in the next round, your resolution will be supported by the country who you supported in the prior session. And same thing, if you try to veto the proposal of country A, you being country B, then your proposal, country B's proposal, will be vetoed by country A when the chance arises of you presenting that proposal. So let's talk about strategies for cooperation now. There are occasions where cooperation is the best strategy. Especially in games involving cooperation, there is something called as cooperative equilibrium. A cooperative equilibrium refers to a situation where all players work together to achieve the best collective outcome rather than acting purely in their individual self-interest. So cooperation is not a dominant strategy for one-off game, because you play once, you always look after your self-interest, but can be a dominant strategy for the game that is played repeatedly. Then we've seen the tit for tat reciprocity. Then you have the focal point strategy, where people tend to choose a default signal when they cannot communicate with each other to coordinate their actions. For example, in a bid auction, the seller might basically give a range of value for their product, say between $1,000 and $1,500, or $1,000 to $2,000 range for a given item, so that the bidder can start the bid at 1,500, so that basically both of them are cooperating. The bidder wants to give a fair bid, and the seller wants to offer a fair. The seller wants to give a fair offer. At the same time, they want to make their own gain. So this is an example of focal point strategy. Then you have the reputation strategy, where entities care about their reputation. This is especially valid in international arena, where countries tend to care about their reputation, because the country interacts with each other on a repeated basis. So reputation is an important part, and cooperation might be the strategy here. Then there's a concept of cooperation for punishment. In some countries, for example, in some cases, countries who share common values, or players who share common bonds, can cooperate to punish their opponent. In real life scenarios, we can see the sanctions, tariffs being imposed on an enemy country, and then also one of the worst thing is to cooperate and wage a war against the third country. Then you have games where you need mixed strategies with probabilities. Player in this case choose mixed strategies with different probabilities to gain an edge over their opponent. If you use a single dominant or optimal strategy, your opponent might guess it and will provide a suitable rebuttal. So it's better to mix strategies with given probabilities. For example, in a rock paper scissors game, there is no pure dominant strategy, and the only way to do is to mix your responses, rock, paper, or scissors, with equal probability of 1/3. We can also see this type of strategy when you are doing when you're kicking when you have penalty kicks in soccer. The person who is hitting the ball will have to not focus only on one spot, because the goalkeeper will then become aware that the people are hitting on this side of the goalpost, and they basically get an edge, looking at their past videos or past performance as to where, for example, Ronaldo hits their goal, or towards the left corner or the right corner repeatedly, and then they gain an edge with that. So the better thing is to basically vary your penalty shoots in different places in the goalpost. Similarly, two competing firms, Firm A and Firm B, they set prices for similar products by basically using a strategy of they should not be falling within a certain range or going beyond a certain range with a given probability. Again, in terms of military tactics, attacking from one direction will basically make it too predictable for the country which is receiving the attack, and the country which is on its defense side has to disperse its asset so that they don't get all their assets destroyed by the other country's attack. And the mixed strategy is also used by the income tax audits, where basically an agency like IRS, and in India probably there are some audit firms, audit companies, income tax department, I guess, will audit people randomly, because if they only audit the rich people, then poor people will start cheating on taxes. And if they only audit poor people, then rich people will start to cheat with impunity. So they have to mix strategies and give some probability so that everybody stays on their foot and pay their taxes properly. So one of the things that we discussed in the beginning of the presentation was that game theory assumes rational entities, but how real is it? Players are influenced by their cognitive biases, by their emotions, and also by their social preferences. People prefer other people who look like them, who share their belief, who share their religion, and they have biases like against or for a certain section of people. Racism is involved. So all these things play out in game theory. We also know that most of the time the Western democracies, Western European democracies, and United States, they kind of don't look for the optimal strategy, but form a bond based on their shared values, as well as to some extent a kind of a Eurocentric views and kind of racism, to be honest. So these things are to be incorporated in behavioral game theory, and this limitation is proposed by Herbert Simon, which we call Herbert Simon's bounded rationality. In this, the players, in this he postulates that the players have lack of complete information, and they have limited cognitive abilities, limited attention, limited memory, and limited processing time in which they have to respond. They don't have all the time to process this information, and come up with the best responses. And they are also constrained by time and resources. So in ultimatum game, for example, we see that fairness becomes very important. So if the proposers give very small values to the responder, like $1, and keep $9 for themselves for a $10 offer, the responder usually rejects it, and both of them lose. In an ideal world, the responder should choose should be happy with whatever they receive, because $1 is better than $0. So they should be happy. But in real world, what happens is there is a sense of ego, this sense of fairness, this sense of reciprocity, which plays out, and people do not usually choose the optimal strategy or the dominant strategy. So behavioral theorists study these irrational parts of the entities and tries to incorporate in the simplified traditional game theory models. So in conclusion, what is game theory? Game theory is a strategic thinking. It provides a framework to analyze decision makings where outcomes depend on the choices of multiple participants. The field in which it is applied is very wide. It's used in economics, politics, business models, and real world interactions, and can predict outcomes. And to be honest, many countries which rely on intelligent policy making make use of game theory and get more success than those countries which do not pay attention to these kind of intellectual developments. Then we also discuss type of games, different models such as cooperative versus non-cooperative, sequential versus simultaneous, and repeated versus one-off. Then we touched upon concepts like Nash equilibrium, dominant strategy, and optimal strategy. Then we also discussed some scenarios like business dilemma, ultimatum game, and tragedies of common. And then we touched base on behavioral game theory. So game theory basically gives an edge. It empowers decision making by anticipating others' strategies, and it equips individuals and organizations to make more informed and strategic choices. So now let's look at some implications in the context of Muslim empowerment. Again, I usually choose topics which are not discussed in as a common knowledge in Muslim circles, but as a member of this community, we should be aware of modern developments and see and see how it is being used and how it can be used in a pragmatic sense. It is completely like it's not a wise decision to ignore this type of knowledge, because it's not found in Muslim traditions, and if it is rejected, it will only harm the Muslim community. Pursuing and being aware of this modern world concept is extremely essential because the landscape has changed, and these type of things are essential for a country to survive and thrive. And what I'm saying is not an Islamic, because Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam encouraged pursuing beneficial knowledge, and in one of our presentation we explicitly covered this section, and then we see the examples in the seerah of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that even when things are not found in divine scripture, for example, he accepted the proposal of Salman al-Farsi radhiyallahu anhu to dig trenches around Medina to save the city from the intruders. And then also we see Khalid bin Walid radhiyallahu anhu, whom we all kind of look at in a heroic sense, repeatedly using hammer and anvil strategy to gain victories for the Muslims. So lastly, the attitude of Muslim activists should be that of an open-minded person, and they should be getting the well-rounded information, and this should be taken up as a religious obligation. Living in our own silos, just repeating the same information that we already know is not going to help. And Muslim Intellectual Network for Empowerment is an effort basically to promote this concept of knowledge in liberal sciences in the Muslim community. Of course, everybody is welcome, but the initiative is primarily to promote this in the Muslim community. And please subscribe us at https mindglobal.org. This leads to our Substack page where we post every week, and also post a couple of times a week a short note, which will basically help you in gaining more insight into how the world works. We are also available on Medium. The website address is mindglobal.medium.org. And if you look at our Substack page, you'll also find links to Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So please participate in our activities, and please join our knowledge portal. And with this, I will end my presentation. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time. And inshallah, I look forward to looking at your comments, and also looking forward for your help in sharing this initiative with other people. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.